My sister spent years mocking me for being too broke to join family vacations. Then I quietly bought a beachfront villa in the Bahamas. When she demanded to stay there for free, I said no. She tried to smear me online, and even flew there with fake texts claiming I invited her. The look on her face when the gate never opened? Priceless. I'm Nathan Carter, 36 years old, and for almost a decade now I've had this strange role in my family that nobody ever talks about out loud. I'm the one who exists just enough to stay in the group chat, but not enough to actually be included in anything that matters. If you looked at our family photos from the outside, you'd think there are only 4 adults and 2 kids in the Carter family. My parents, my older sister Melissa, her husband Daniel, and their 2 kids. Somehow, I'm always missing from the frame, like a background character who wandered out of the shot. It wasn't always like this. When we were younger, things felt normal. Melissa and I grew up in the same house in Columbus, Ohio, sharing the same cramped kitchen, the same family dinners, the same Christmas mornings where we fought over who opened presents first. Back then, it didn't feel like we were living completely different lives. But somewhere along the way, things shifted so gradually that I didn't even realize what was happening until it was already normal. Melissa married Daniel when I was 27. Daniel worked in finance, made good money, and came from the kind of family that casually talked about ski trips and beach houses like they were grocery store errands. After the wedding, their life seemed to accelerate into this constant stream of expensive vacations and polished family moments that looked like something out of travel magazine. Hawaii one year, Greece the next, Aspen in the winter, Napa Valley in the fall. And every single time, I found out the same way, through the family group chat. My phone would buzz while I was sitting at my small desk trying to fix some random client's computer issue remotely. I'd open the chat and see a burst of photos. White beaches, turquoise water, Melissa smiling in oversized sunglasses, Daniel holding a glass of wine on a balcony somewhere that probably cost more per night than my rent for a month. Then the captions would follow. Family vacation time. So grateful for this trip. Kids are loving Hawaii. I'd stare at the photos for a few seconds longer than I probably should have, then press the little thumbs up reaction like I always did. Sometimes I'd type something simple like, looks amazing, or hope you guys have fun. Then I'd set my phone down and go back to whatever freelance job I was trying to finish. No one ever asked why I wasn't there. They didn't have to. The explanation always hovered in the background of every conversation, like a silent agreement. Everyone understood, but nobody acknowledged. Nathan wouldn't want to come. Nathan's probably busy. Nathan isn't really the vacation type. I heard those phrases often enough over the years that they became the official story. Melissa said it once during a family dinner a few years ago while showing our parents pictures from some beach resort in Mexico. You know Nathan, she said with a little shrug. He's not really into travel like we are. I remember sitting right there at the table while she said it, chewing slowly and pretending it didn't bother me. The truth was a lot simpler than that. I wasn't invited because I was broke. Not dramatically broke in a way that makes a good story, just a slow, quiet kind of broke that comes from working freelance for too many years. I fixed computers, set up networks, helped small businesses with IT problems that bigger companies didn't want to deal with. Some months were decent. Some months I barely scraped together enough to cover rent. My apartment sits above a coin laundry on the east side of Columbus. The place is small enough that if I stretch my arms out in the kitchen, I can almost touch both walls. The washing machines downstairs run late into the night, and the vibrations travel through the floor. So the whole place hums like a tired engine. It's not glamorous, but it's what I can afford. Meanwhile, Melissa and Daniel live in a house that has a kitchen island bigger than my entire living room. Their kids go to a private school where tuition costs more than my yearly car repairs. Their vacations look like something influencers post online. And I get postcards. Well, technically not postcards. Usually cheap souvenirs mailed after the trip. A fridge magnet from Santorini. A small keychain shaped like a surfboard from Maui. Once they sent a snow globe from Aspen with a tiny skier inside. Each time the package arrives, there's a little note. Thought you liked this. Wish you could have seen it. Maybe next time. I always put the souvenirs on the small metal shelf above my desk. Over the years, the collection has grown into this strange little museum of places my own family went without me. Sometimes I catch myself staring at them while the laundry machines rumble below my floor. The part that used to hurt the most wasn't even the trips themselves. It was how casual everything felt. Like my absence was the most natural thing in the world. No arguments. No awkward conversations. No apologies. Just photos in the group chat, a few heart reactions, and life moving on. For a long time, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself vacations were overrated anyway. I told myself I was too busy building my freelance work to take time off. But every now and then, usually late at night when the laundry downstairs finally went quiet, the truth settled in a little heavier. I wasn't excluded because I caused problems. I wasn't excluded because I didn't get along with anyone. I was excluded because I didn't have money. And after enough years of silently pressing like on pictures of beaches I'd never see, it became impossible to pretend I didn't notice. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was imagining things, that maybe the distance between me and the rest of my family wasn't intentional. But over the years, it became harder to ignore the small moments that kept piling up, the kind that on their own might seem harmless, but together slowly grind down whatever confidence you have left. My sister Melissa had a talent for it, a very specific kind of talent where nothing she said was openly cruel, yet somehow every sentence carried a quiet reminder of where I stood compared to everyone else. Family dinners were where it happened the most. My parents still liked to host them every couple of months, usually on a Sunday evening, and I kept going even after I started realizing how uncomfortable those nights made me feel. Part of me thought that if I kept showing up, things would eventually go back to the way they used to be when we were younger, when dinner was just dinner and not a subtle competition about who had the most exciting life. Melissa always arrived last, usually with Daniel and the kids, and within minutes of sitting down, she would start pulling out her phone. She never did it in an obvious bragging way. Instead, she presented it like she was simply sharing memories with the family, casually scrolling through hundreds of photos from whatever luxury destination they had visited recently. One evening it was Greece. I remember that one clearly because she connected her phone to the living room TV so everyone could see the pictures in a slideshow. Suddenly the entire room was filled with bright images of white buildings and blue ocean water while we sat there eating baked chicken at my parents' dining table. "Oh, this one was from Santorini," she said with a relaxed smile while clicking through the photos. The view from a hotel balcony was insane. My parents leaned forward, genuinely impressed, asking questions about the island and the restaurants they visited. Daniel added small details about boat tours and wine tastings while the kids ran around the room pretending to swim. Then Melissa glanced at me with that half-playful expression she often used when she was about to say something that sounded like a joke. "Nathan, have you ever thought about saving up and actually seeing the world?" she said lightly. "You'd love places like this." Everyone chuckled politely like she had made an innocent suggestion. I forced a small smile and shrugged, pretending the comment didn't land exactly the way it was meant to. "Maybe someday," I said. Inside, though, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the quiet embarrassment that came from being singled out without anyone technically insulting you. Melissa always made it sound like my situation was simply the result of laziness or lack of ambition, like I had chosen this life of constant financial stress because I wasn't motivated enough to change it. It happened again months later after they came back from Aspen. Another slideshow, another round of stories about ski resorts and fancy restaurants, and another casual remark directed toward me about how I should get out more and experience life. By that point, I had learned how to sit there quietly, nod when appropriate, and laugh along with everyone else while feeling like an extra person who had wandered into the wrong house. The moment that finally changed how I saw my family happened a few months before my mom's birthday. I wasn't even told about it directly. One afternoon, I was talking to my cousin Eric on the phone about something unrelated when he casually mentioned how excited he was for the upcoming cruise. At first, I had no idea what he was talking about. "What cruise?" I asked. "The Caribbean one for your mom's birthday," he said. "Your sister said the whole family's going." I remember standing there in my kitchen above the laundry machines, staring at the wall while his words slowly sank in. The whole family was going on a luxury Caribbean cruise, and somehow I had never heard a single word about it. After the call ended, I sat for a while just thinking about whether I should even bring it up. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely. But eventually curiosity won, and I called my mom later that evening. I tried to keep my voice casual when I asked about the trip. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that," she said awkwardly. The hesitation in her voice already told me everything I needed to know, but I let her explain anyway. "Well, Melissa and Daniel found this really nice cruise package for my birthday," she continued slowly. "Your father, and I thought it sounded lovely, and your sister started organizing it with everyone." Another pause followed, the kind filled with quiet discomfort. "We just assumed it might not really be practical for you," she finally added. Practical. That was the word she chose. I stood there listening to the faint humming of washing machines through the floor, while my own mother explained that nobody had invited me because they assumed I couldn't afford it. There was no anger in her voice, no sense that anything unusual had happened. It sounded like the most reasonable decision in the world. No one had even considered offering to help. No one had thought to ask if I wanted to go anyway. And most noticeably, no one apologized. I let out a small laugh into the phone because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah, I said, that makes sense. We talked for another minute about something meaningless before ending the call. As soon as I hung up, the apartment felt unusually quiet, even though the laundry machines downstairs were still rumbling. That night, I sat at my desk with my laptop open, watching repair tutorials on YouTube while taking notes about software fixes and hardware troubleshooting techniques that might help me pick up a few more freelance jobs. I wasn't studying because I enjoyed it. I was studying because rent was due soon, and I needed every dollar I could earn. While the videos played, my phone buzzed with new messages in the family group chat. Someone had posted a screenshot of the cruise ship itinerary with excited comments about beaches and excursions. I didn't open the chat. Instead, I kept watching tutorial videos and writing down steps I already mostly knew, pretending that the life unfolding on my phone screen had nothing to do with me anymore. That was around the time something in my attitude toward my family started to change. I stopped expecting invitations that were never going to come. I stopped trying to participate in conversations where I clearly didn't belong. If they had already decided I was a broke, boring brother who didn't fit into their world, then maybe the easiest thing to do was stop trying to prove them wrong. So little by little, without announcing it to anyone, I began quietly stepping back from them. After the cruise incident, I stopped expecting anything from my family. And the strange thing was that once I let go of that expectation, a lot of quiet frustration I had been carrying around for years slowly turned into something else. Instead of constantly wondering why I was included, I started focusing almost entirely on the one part of my life I could actually control, which was my work. At the time, it wasn't glamorous in any way. Most of my days were spent sitting at the same small desk in my apartment above the coin laundry, surrounded by the low mechanical rumble of washing machines and the faint smell of detergent drifting through the floorboards. My freelance IT jobs were inconsistent and often underpaid, but they had one advantage. They forced me to learn something new almost every week. A small bakery needed their point-of-sale system repaired. A local dentist wanted someone to fix a broken server that stored patient files. A startup founder I found on a freelance website needed help setting up cloud storage for a basic mobile app. None of these jobs paid much individually, but each problem required me to figure something out, and over time those problems started to feel less like chores and more like puzzles that slowly expanded my skill set. At some point I realized that if I wanted to survive long-term doing this kind of work, basic computer repair wouldn't be enough. The industry was changing too quickly, and the people making real money were the ones building things instead of just fixing them. So I started teaching myself new skills late at night after finishing client work. Web development came first because it was the most accessible. I spent countless evenings watching programming tutorials, pausing videos every few minutes so I could experiment with the code myself. The learning process was frustrating and slow, especially at the beginning when nothing seemed to work the way it was supposed to, but gradually the pieces started fitting together. Once I became comfortable building websites, I moved deeper into back-end development, learning how databases worked, how servers handle requests, and how entire applications were structured behind the scenes. Cybersecurity became another obsession after I realized how many small companies had absolutely no protection against even the most basic attacks. The more I studied, the more valuable those skills became, and before long I was taking on projects that were far more complex than the small repair jobs I used to depend on. Those years blurred together in a strange routine of work, learning, and more work. I rarely went out. Most of my social interactions happened through emails, video calls, or project management dashboards with clients I had never met in person. My apartment never got bigger, and the washing machines downstairs kept humming late into the night, just like they always had. But gradually my bank account started looking a little less terrifying. One of the turning points came through a contract I almost didn't take. A small travel booking startup contacted me through a freelance platform because their website kept crashing whenever too many users tried to search for flights at the same time. At that point, they were still a tiny company with only a handful of employees, operating out of what looked like a cramped shared office somewhere in Texas. The project itself sounded simple on paper. Rebuild their back-end system so the platform could handle more traffic. The job ended up being far more complicated than expected. Their entire system had been built quickly by someone who clearly didn't plan for growth, and almost every part of the code needed to be redesigned. For weeks, I worked long hours rewriting huge sections of the platform while coordinating remotely with their small team. It was exhausting work, the kind that left my eyes burning after staring at code for 12 hours straight. But when the new system finally launched, it handled traffic almost 10 times better than before. Not long after that, the company started growing in ways none of us predicted. Travel demand exploded as people returned to booking trips, and suddenly their platform was being used by thousands of customers every day. Because I was the one who understood the architecture best, they kept bringing me back whenever new features needed to be added or the system needed scaling again. What began as a short freelance contract slowly turned into a long-term development role where I essentially became their primary technical partner. With that project on my portfolio, other opportunities started appearing more frequently. A few startups hired me to design secure payment integrations. Several online businesses needed help building scalable platforms. The work became more complex, but it also paid significantly better than the small repair jobs I used to rely on. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly calculating whether I had enough money to cover rent. By the 9th year of this routine, something interesting happened. Instead of constantly chasing freelance contracts, I realized I had enough consistent clients to organize the work differently. I started reaching out to a few other developers I had met online over the years, people who specialized in areas like mobile apps, cloud infrastructure, and security testing. Most of them were also independent freelancers who were tired of handling everything alone. Gradually, we formed a small distributed team that worked remotely across different states. We weren't a massive company by any means, but we had enough talent between us to handle larger projects that would have been impossible for a single developer. I officially registered the business under a simple name and began coordinating contracts through the company instead of as an individual freelancer. For the first time in my adult life, financial stability stopped feeling temporary. Projects came in consistently. Clients trusted us with larger budgets. My bank account finally reached numbers that would have seemed impossible during the years when I was fixing broken computers for a few $100s at a time. What surprised me most was how little I felt the need to tell my family about any of it. Over the years, they had built a clear image of who I was in their minds. The struggling brother who lived in a tiny apartment and quietly liked their vacation photos from afar. Correcting that image suddenly felt unnecessary. I didn't want validation from people who had spent nearly a decade dismissing me. So I kept everything to myself and continued living my quiet life, working from the same apartment above the coin laundry, while building a business that no one in my family even knew existed. One evening, not long after my small company had started running smoothly, I was sitting at my desk finishing a deployment update for one of our clients when my phone buzzed on the table next to the keyboard. The sound was familiar enough that I already knew where the notification came from before I even picked it up. It was the family group chat again. For years, that chat had mostly become background noise in my life, something I glanced at occasionally but rarely engaged with. Yet out of habit, I still opened it. Melissa had posted a new batch of photos. This time, it was some kind of tropical resort. The pictures showed white sand, enormous lounge chairs under umbrellas, drinks with slices of pineapple balanced on the rims of the glasses, and Daniel standing waist-deep in perfectly clear water with their kids splashing around him. Melissa stood in the foreground wearing oversized sunglasses and smiling the same polished smile she used in almost every vacation picture. Under the photo, she wrote something about how grateful she was for another perfect getaway and how important it was to enjoy life instead of working all the time. I stared at the message for a moment longer than usual. Strangely, I didn't feel the same quiet sting that those photos used to cause years earlier. By that point, my life looked completely different than the one my family imagined. I had stable income, a growing company, and more financial security than I had ever expected. The problem wasn't jealousy anymore. It was exhaustion. After nearly a decade of silently watching their vacations from the sidelines, something about that moment felt absurd. I wasn't angry at Melissa. I wasn't even offended anymore. I was simply tired of the strange, invisible role I had been playing in their version of reality. Instead of replying to chat or reacting with the usual thumbs up, I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. For a while, I just sat there listening to the faint hum of washing machines through the floor, the same sound that had filled this apartment for years. My laptop screen still displayed lines of code from the deployment I had been working on, but my attention drifted somewhere else entirely. Almost absent-mindedly, I opened a new browser tab and typed something into the search bar that I had never seriously looked up before. Oceanfront home for sale. At first, it was nothing more than curiosity. I scrolled through listings the way people sometimes scroll through photos of expensive cars they have no intention of buying. Beach houses in California, condos in Florida, villas scattered across different Caribbean islands. The prices varied wildly, some completely unrealistic, others surprisingly within the range of what I could technically afford if I wanted to. That realization made me pause. For years, my brain had been conditioned to treat things like beachfront property as something reserved for people like Melissa and Daniel, people who traveled constantly and lived visibly expensive lives. The quiet truth I had been ignoring was that my own financial situation had changed dramatically without me adjusting my expectations. I kept browsing. Eventually, one listing caught my attention more than the others. It was located in Harbor Cay in Bahamas, a place I had never heard of before that appeared on the map as a thin strip of land surrounded by deep turquoise water. The property itself was described as a 2-bedroom oceanfront villa with modern glass walls facing directly toward the beach. The photo showed a low white structure built only a few steps from the shoreline. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the sunlight off the water. The interior looked simple and open, with pale wood floors and large sliding doors that led straight onto sand. Unlike many of the other listings I'd seen, this place didn't look like a crowded resort property packed with neighboring houses. It looked quiet, private, isolated in the best possible way. I clicked through the photos slowly, studying each angle of the house and the stretch of beach that extended in both directions. The listing price appeared near the bottom of the page. It was high enough to make me sit up a little straighter, but not so high that it was impossible. In fact, after doing the math in my head, I realized something that made me laugh quietly to myself. I could actually afford it. The idea seemed ridiculous at first. I had spent so many years barely managing rent in a cramped apartment above a coin laundry that buying a beach villa in another country felt like something that belonged in someone else's life. But the more I looked at the listing, the more the thought refused to leave my mind. 2 days later, I was on a plane. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I simply scheduled a few meetings with clients around the travel time, packed a small bag, and flew south toward the Bahamas. The moment the plane doors opened after landing, warm ocean air rushed through the cabin, carrying that faint salty smell that only exists near the sea. Harbor Cay turned out to be exactly as quiet as the listing photo suggested. The island felt calm and slow compared to the constant movement of cities. Palm trees lined the narrow roads, and the sound of waves was almost always present somewhere in the background. When I first saw the villa in person, the image looked almost identical to the photos, except the real version felt more vivid. Sunlight reflected off the glass walls. The sand stretched out only a few steps beyond the back door. The ocean itself moved slowly in gentle waves that rolled toward the shore in steady rhythms. I walked through the house with the real estate agent while he explained details about the property, but most of his words faded into the background. My attention kept drifting toward the view through the glass walls. Eventually, I stepped outside and walked down onto the sand. The beach was completely empty. No crowds, no noise, just the sound of water moving back and forth across the shoreline. I slipped off my shoes and stood there barefoot, while the warm sand shifted slightly under my feet. For the first time in a long while, my mind felt quiet. Standing there, looking out at the endless water, I realized something important about the emotions that had pushed me to open that real estate website in the first place. I hadn't been searching for revenge against my family. I didn't want to prove anything to Melissa or anyone else. What I wanted was distance, peace, a place where the constant comparisons and subtle humiliations of the past decade simply didn't exist. 2 days later, I signed the paperwork. The process happened almost unrealistically fast, and before the week ended, the villa in Harbor Cay officially belonged to me. When I flew back to Ohio afterward, I didn't announce the purchase to anyone. I didn't post photos online or mention it in the family group chat. Instead, I kept it completely private. Over the following months, I slowly furnished the villa during occasional trips back to the island. A simple bed facing the ocean, comfortable chairs near the windows, a desk where I could work while looking out at the water. Each visit felt like stepping into a completely different life. One where the quiet brother who lived above a laundry room had somehow built something no one in his family believed he was capable of achieving. And the strange part was that I felt no urge to tell them. The villa existed quietly in my life, like a personal secret resting on a peaceful stretch of beach thousands of miles away. For almost a year, the villa in Harbor Cay remained a quiet part of my life that existed completely outside of my family's awareness. During that time, I visited the island several times, usually staying for a week at a time while working remotely. My routine there was simple and peaceful in a way that still felt surreal whenever I thought about it. I would wake up early to the sound of waves moving across the sand just outside the glass walls, make coffee in the small modern kitchen, and sit by the window while the morning light spread across the ocean. Work felt different there. Instead of staring at gray apartment walls and listening to washing machines rumbling below my floor, I wrote code while looking out at endless blue water. The quietness of the place created a kind of calm that I hadn't realized I was missing from most of my adult life. Back in Columbus, nothing about my daily life looked dramatically different to anyone who might have been paying attention. I still lived in the same apartment above the coin laundry. I still worked remotely on my laptop for most of the day. The only real change was that every few months I disappeared for a short period, telling clients I was traveling while continuing to handle projects from a different time zone. My family never questioned it because they rarely asked about my life in detail anyway. Eventually, though, secrets have a strange way of surfacing even when you aren't trying to reveal them. The moment everything changed happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing a security audit report for one of our clients. My phone suddenly started buzzing repeatedly on the desk beside me. At first, I ignored it because group chat notifications had become such a normal background distraction that I didn't feel any urgency to check them immediately. But the vibrations kept coming one after another, faster than usual, until curiosity finally made me pick it up. When I opened a family chat, dozens of new messages had already appeared. Most of them looked strangely enthusiastic. My cousin Eric was the first one I noticed. He had written something like, "Nathan, I had no idea you own a place in the Bahamas. That's incredible." A few seconds later, another message popped up from one of my aunts congratulating me and adding a string of excited emojis. Then my dad chimed in saying something about how proud he was of my success. I stared at the screen in confusion for a moment before the situation started making sense. Apparently, one of Daniel's friends had visited Harbor Cay recently and recognized my name during a conversation with someone on the island. Small places have a way of connecting people in unexpected ways, and somehow the information had made its way back to Daniel and then quickly spread to the rest of the family. Within minutes, the chat had turned into a flood of cheerful messages. Secret millionaire Nathan. Why didn't you tell us you owned a beach villa? Looks like you've been holding out on us. Some of the comments sounded like jokes, but the tone felt strange after so many years of being treated like the struggling brother who barely managed rent. I watched the conversation unfold without responding, scrolling through the messages as they piled up. Then Melissa finally joined the discussion. Her message appeared in the chat with a level of casual confidence that immediately caught my attention. "Well, this works out perfectly," she wrote. "Daniel and I were already planning a summer trip to the Bahamas with the kids. Nathan, can you reserve the villa for us for a week?" The wording stood out instantly. She didn't ask if it would be possible to stay there. She didn't mention visiting together or spending time as a family. Instead, she phrased it exactly the way someone might talk to a hotel manager. Reserve the villa. I stared at the message for a while before typing my response. My fingers moved slowly across the keyboard of my phone, not because I was angry, but because I want to keep the tone as calm and direct as possible. "The villa isn't available," I wrote. For a brief moment, the chat went quiet. Then Melissa replied almost immediately. "What do you mean it's not available?" she wrote. "You said you go there alone. It's not like anyone else is using it." Her message was followed by another one seconds later. "Honestly, Nathan, this is a little ridiculous. It's just a week." The irritation in her tone was obvious even through text. I kept my response short. "I'm not renting it out." I wrote, "It's a private place." The reaction came instantly. "Wow," Melissa replied. "So you'd rather let it sit empty than let your own family use it. That's incredibly selfish." Within a few minutes, other messages started appearing in the chat as well. My mom tried to soften the situation by suggesting that maybe we could all plan a family trip there together. My dad added that it would be nice if everyone could spend time in such a beautiful place. The pressure built quickly, and soon the conversation turned into a familiar dynamic I had seen many times before, where Melissa expressed frustration while my parents encouraged me to compromise. "You should be the bigger person," my mom wrote. "Your sister is just excited." Reading those words triggered something that had been sitting quietly inside me for years. It wasn't sudden rage or even bitterness. It felt more like a long-delayed realization that the situation in front of me was exactly the same pattern that had existed for nearly a decade. When I struggled financially, they excluded me without hesitation. Now that I had something valuable, they expected immediate access to it. I looked at the phone for a long moment before typing my next message. This time I didn't keep it short. "For years you all took vacations together and never invited me." I wrote slowly. "I watched photos of trips to Hawaii, Greece, Aspen, and plenty of other places while sitting in my apartment above a laundry room. No one thought about including me because you assumed I didn't have money. The chat went completely silent while I continued typing. When you planned that cruise for Mom's birthday, I found out from a cousin by accident, not when you called to invite me or even asked if I want to come. You decided I couldn't afford it and moved on. My hand stayed steady as I finished the message. So now things are different. I worked for years to build something for myself, and I finally have a place where I can be left alone. You didn't want me around when I was struggling, so you don't get access now that I succeeded. After sending the message, I placed the phone back on the desk and returned my attention to the laptop screen in front of me. For the first time in 10 years, I had finally said the truth out loud. After I sent that message to the family chat, the silence that followed lasted for several hours, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe the situation had finally ended. I imagined that everyone had read my explanation, felt uncomfortable about the truth behind it, and decided to simply move on. That expectation lasted less than a day. The next morning, my phone started buzzing again, but this time the notifications weren't coming from a family chat. Instead, they were arriving from social media accounts I rarely used and from messages sent by people I hadn't spoken to in years. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I opened one of the notifications and saw a comment from an old acquaintance asking why I had suddenly turned my back on my family. The wording felt strange enough that I immediately opened Instagram, an app one usually ignored for weeks at a time. Within seconds, I found the source of confusion. Melissa had made a post. The photo she used showed a cropped screenshot of the ocean view from my villa, clearly taken from the listing photos or something someone on the island had shared. Over the image, she had written a long caption that carefully presented her version of the story. She described how her younger brother had recently become rich and purchased a private beach villa in the Bahamas, then explained that when the family tried to plan a visit, he refused to let them stay there. The way she wrote it made the situation sound simple and cruel at the same time. She talked about how families should support each other and how money can sometimes change people in disappointing ways. The line that seemed designed to get the most attention appeared near the end of the caption. Apparently, success made my brother forget the family that supported him. Reading that sentence made me lean back slowly in my chair. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen while the washing machines downstairs hummed the floor like they always did. Within hours, the post had already gathered dozens of comments. Some of them came from relatives who clearly had only heard Melissa's version of events. They expressed sympathy for her and disappointment in me, repeating phrases about how sad it was when money ruined family relationships. Other comments came from people I barely recognized anymore, old classmates or acquaintances who had drifted through my life years earlier. Money changes people. Family should come first. Sounds like someone forgot where he came from. The situation grew stranger as the day continued. Melissa had a fairly active social media presence, and the posts started spreading beyond our immediate circle of relatives. Friends of friends added their opinions. A few people shared the post publicly with comments about how wealth sometimes reveals someone's true character. By the afternoon, I began receiving direct messages from people I had never met. Some of them were polite but judgmental, asking why I wouldn't share my vacation home with family. Others were far more direct, accusing me of abandoning the people who supposedly helped me reach success. None of these strangers had any real information about my life, yet they spoke with the confidence of people who believed they understood the entire situation. At first, I ignored everything. I closed the app and went back to work, focusing on client meetings and development tasks, while my phone continued buzzing with notifications I chose not to read. My instinct was to let the drama fade on its own. Social media outrage often burns brightly for a short time before disappearing, when people move on to the next distraction. But this situation didn't fade. Over the next several days, Melissa continued adding comments beneath her original post, occasionally replying to people who supported her and reinforcing the same narrative. Each response painted the picture more clearly. I was a brother who had suddenly become wealthy and selfish, the one who refused to help the loving family that had always been there for him. Watching the story grow, without context, felt surreal. For years, I had quietly accepted being overlooked, excluded from trips and decisions without protest. Now that I had finally defended a boundary, the entire situation had been reversed so that I appeared ungrateful and arrogant. The realization that bothered me most wasn't the criticism itself. It was the understanding that Melissa wasn't simply venting frustration. She was controlling the story. As long as her version remained the only one circulating publicly, everyone who encountered it would naturally assume it was accurate. I could have responded directly under her post, writing a long explanation about the years of subtle exclusion and humiliation that led to my decision, but something about that idea felt pointless. Social media arguments rarely produce clarity. They usually just create more noise. A few days later, an unexpected opportunity appeared through a completely different channel. One of my clients had previously collaborated with a travel journalist named Olivia Grant, a writer who occasionally published long-form articles about unique destinations and the people connected to them. During a casual conversation, he mentioned my villa in Harbor Cay and the unusual path that had led me to buying it. Apparently, the story caught Olivia's attention. She contacted me through email with a simple proposal. She wanted to write a piece about individuals who built unconventional careers that allowed them to live and work remotely in unusual locations. My journey from a struggling freelance IT worker in Ohio to running a small distributed tech company while owning a quiet villa in the Bahamas fit perfectly into the theme she was exploring. At first, I hesitated. I had spent years keeping most details of my personal life private, and part of me wondered if drawing attention to the story would only amplify the drama already surrounding my name. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Olivia's article offered something different from the chaotic arguments happening online. It offered context. When we finally spoke during a long video call, I explained my background in detail. I described the years of freelance work, the slow process of teaching myself programming and cybersecurity, and the exhausting nights spent studying while trying to earn enough money to survive. I talked about the travel startup that eventually became my first major client, and how that opportunity slowly expanded into the small remote tech company I now operated with a team scattered across the United States. Most importantly, I told the story without mentioning revenge or bitterness. The villa in Harbor Cay wasn't presented as a symbol of proving anyone wrong. Instead, Olivia focused on the idea that perseverance and independence can quietly transform someone's life over time. The beach house became part of the narrative as a personal refuge, a place that represented the calm I'd been searching for after years of feeling invisible in my own family. When the article was finally published, the tone was calm and thoughtful, almost complete opposite of the emotional storm that had been building online. It described my path from overlooked freelancer to successful entrepreneur, highlighting the patience and persistence required to build something meaningful from nothing. For the first time since Melissa's post had spread across social media, the story about my life no longer belonged entirely to someone else's version of events. Once Olivia's article was published, I tried not to monitor the reaction too closely, but it became impossible to ignore how quickly the tone around me began to change. For days, my phone filled with messages from people who had clearly read the piece and suddenly saw me through a completely different lens. Some were former classmates who admitted they had misunderstood the situation after seeing Melissa's posts. Others were distant relatives who had apparently never bothered to think about what the last 10 years had actually looked like from my side. What struck me most was not that people were praising me, but that many of them were asking the most basic question no one in my family had seriously asked before, which was why I had been treated as optional for so long. Olivia had written the article carefully, and because of that it didn't come across as some dramatic attempt to expose my family. It simply laid out the sequence of my life in a way that made the contrast impossible to miss. A man who had spent years quietly working from a cramped apartment, building a career through persistence, had eventually created enough stability to buy himself a peaceful place in the Bahamas. There was no flashy revenge in it, no cruel language, no bitterness dressed up as triumph. The calmness of that story did more damage to Melissa's version of events than any direct attack ever could have. People started sharing the article, commenting on the determination it must have taken to build that kind of life without family support. Some focus on the career side of it, admiring the years of technical work and self-education. Others focus on the emotional part, the way a person could become nearly invisible inside his own family and still keep moving forward. Even relatives who had previously remained silent began sounding less certain when they spoke to me. The shift was subtle at first, but I could feel it. Melissa felt it too, and unlike me, she did not handle that shift quietly. I noticed the first signs in the messages she sent over the next week. Her tone changed from self-righteous anger to something more frantic and sharp-edged. She accused me of manipulating public sympathy, of making the family look cruel, of turning private issues into some inspirational media narrative. The irony of that didn't escape me. She had been perfectly happy to turn me into the villain in public as long as she controlled the script. The moment another version of the truth existed, she started acting like the victim of some coordinated attack. I stopped responding. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. I had spent too many years explaining myself to people who only listened when my explanation benefited them. So when her messages became more agitated, I simply let them sit unanswered. I thought eventually she would run out of energy. Instead, she escalated. I found out because I received a call from the local caretaker in Harbor Cay, a reliable older man named Russell who had been helping me keep an eye on the villa whenever I was back in Ohio. He handled basic maintenance, checked the property after storms, and made sure everything stayed secure when I wasn't there. He was calm by nature, not the kind of person who called unless something genuinely unusual had happened. When I answered, his voice was polite but serious. He told me that earlier that day a couple had arrived at the villa with luggage and 2 children, claiming they had permission to stay. The names alone made my stomach tighten before he even finished the sentence. Melissa and Daniel. According to Russell, Melissa had approached the property with the confidence of someone expecting immediate access. She showed him screenshots on her phone that appeared to be messages from me confirming that they were welcome to use the villa for the week. At first glance, he said, the screenshots looked real enough in the rushed, casual way most text conversations do. But something about the whole interaction made him cautious. I had never once mentioned family guests arriving, and Russell knew I was the kind of person who always gave advance notice about anyone visiting the property. So instead of unlocking the house, he told him he needed to verify the arrangement with me directly. That was when Melissa became irritated. Russell described her tone carefully, almost diplomatically, but I could read between the lines. She insisted that I had already approved the stay. She claimed I was probably unavailable because of work. She tried to pressure him by acting offended that he would question her. He still refused. When he sent me the screenshots she had shown him, I opened them and felt something in me go cold. They were fake. Not laughably fake. Not the kind with obvious spelling errors or ridiculous formatting, but edited just carefully enough to look convincing to someone who didn't know better. My name appeared at the top. The message bubbles mimicked the style of our actual conversations. The wording was even constructed to sound vaguely like me, short and practical, confirming that the villa would be open for them upon arrival. But it wasn't me. The more I stared at those images, the clearer it became that Melissa had reached a point far beyond anger or entitlement. She had taken the time to manufacture evidence, fly to another country with her husband, and attempt to enter my private property under false pretenses. The whole thing was so calculated that for a few moments I just sat there in my apartment, phone in hand, listening to the washing machines below the floor and trying to absorb the fact that my own sister had forged messages to gain access to a house she had been explicitly told she could not use. Russell told me they eventually left after realizing he would not let them in. I thanked him, asked him to keep the screenshots, and told him he had done exactly the right thing. After we ended the call, I remained at my desk for a long time without moving. That was the moment I fully understood how far Melissa was willing to go in order to preserve control over the story she wanted the world to believe. This was no longer about a vacation or hurt feelings. It was about access, image, and a refusal to accept that I had built something she could not simply absorb into her own life. I still didn't argue with her. By then I knew that direct confrontation only fed the cycle she depended on. She wanted drama, emotional reaction, a fight she could twist into further proof that I had become cold and cruel. Instead, I responded in the most practical way possible. First, I formalized everything around the villa. Until then, the property had been private in a loose, personal sense. Friends almost never visited, and the few people who had stayed there did so because I invited them directly. After the incident, I worked with a local attorney and a property management service to create a formal guest approval system. Every visitor would now need advance written confirmation submitted through an official process tied to the property itself. No screenshots, no casual claims, no improvisation. Approved guests would be logged by name, dates would be recorded, and access would only be granted once the system reflected it clearly. Russell supported the change immediately. He had seen enough in that one encounter to understand why it mattered. Once the system was in place, I made one more decision that felt even more personal. The villa had a simple website already, mostly created so I could manage property details, maintenance information, and local contacts in one place. It wasn't public in any meaningful sense, just a quiet online home for the house itself. After what happened, I added a new page and wrote a personal essay. I did not mention Melissa by name. I did not recount every insult or every exclusion in bitter detail. Instead, I wrote about what it means to rebuild a life after being treated like the family scapegoat, after years of being seen as the least impressive person in every room, the one who could be overlooked without consequence. I wrote about the strange loneliness of being tolerated but not valued, and about how easy it is for families to assign roles that become so fixed no one notices the damage they cause. I wrote about work, about silence, about the dignity of building something in private when no one expects anything from you except failure. Most of all, I wrote about peace. I explained that the villa was never meant to be a trophy or a weapon. It was a place created from years of effort, a place that represented the right to exist somewhere without being diminished. The boundaries around it were not acts of cruelty. They were acts of self-respect. When I published the essay on the site, I felt none of the adrenaline that usually follows conflict. What I felt instead was steadier than that. A kind of clarity I had spent years trying to reach without fully understanding it. For most of my life, I had thought survival meant enduring whatever version of me other people found convenient. Now, I understood that survival sometimes means building a door, locking it when necessary, and refusing to apologize for finally living on the other side of it. After the essay appeared on the villa's website, I expected it to remain relatively unnoticed, the way most quiet personal writing does when it sits on a small corner of the internet without promotion. What I underestimated was how quickly stories travel when people recognize pieces of themselves inside them. Within a few weeks, links to the essay began appearing in places I had never visited before. Small blogs about personal growth referenced it. A few technology forums shared it because of the part about building a company quietly from freelance work. Someone on a podcast about family dynamics mentioned the story during an episode about overlooked siblings who quietly rebuild their lives outside of toxic expectations. At first, I followed the reactions only casually, but the pattern became obvious very quickly. The responses were not about my villa or the Bahamas or even my career. They were about recognition. Message after message came from people describing the same quiet role I had lived for years. The sibling who was always compared unfavorably to the more successful one. The family member who was treated like background furniture during major decisions. The person who sat through dinners and celebrations knowing they were tolerated but never truly valued. Reading those messages sometimes left me staring at the screen longer than expected. Many of them described experiences that sounded almost identical to my own past, just happening in different families and different cities. What surprised me most was how many people wrote about discovering peace only after they stopped trying to earn approval that was never going to come. Over time, the story kept spreading in unexpected ways. A few online magazines contacted me asking if they could reference the essay and articles about remote work and unconventional success stories. Olivia checked in occasionally as well, amused by how far the narrative had traveled beyond the original article she wrote. Eventually, a small documentary team reached out after hearing about the story through one of those podcasts. They explained that they were creating a short documentary about quiet resilience, focusing on people who had rebuilt their lives through persistence rather than dramatic public conflict. The concept fit perfectly with the path my life had taken, so after some consideration, I agreed to participate. Filming the documentary felt strangely calm compared to the chaos that had surrounded the earlier social media drama. The crew spent a few days in Harbor Cay, capturing simple footage of the villa and the shoreline. They recorded long conversations where I described the years spent learning skills late at night, the steady growth of my small company, and the realization that peace sometimes requires distance from people who refuse to see you clearly. Standing barefoot on the beach during one of those filming sessions, I thought about the younger version of myself who used to sit in a cramped apartment above a coin laundry, quietly pressing the like button on vacation photos from places I believed I would never visit. That version of me had no idea how slowly but steadily life could change when attention shifted away from seeking approval and toward building something real. While my own life settled into that calm rhythm, news about Melissa occasionally reached me through relatives or mutual acquaintances. I never searched for updates about her, but information travels easily through family networks whether you invite it or not. Over time, it became clear that the image she had spent years constructing for the world had begun to crack. Daniel had apparently grown tired of the constant need to maintain appearances, the endless pressure to present a perfect lifestyle online, and the escalating drama that followed the situation with the villa. Their marriage had been under strain long before my story circulated publicly, and eventually he left. When I first heard that news, I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. What I felt instead was a quiet sense of distance, like observing a storm far out at sea that no longer had the power to reach the shore where I stood. Melissa's life was unraveling in ways that had nothing to do with me anymore. The choices that shaped her situation belonged entirely to her. I never celebrated any of it. By that point, my days looked very different from the ones I used to live. Much of my time was spent at the villa in Harbor Cay, working remotely with my small team spread across the United States. The company had grown steadily, not into some massive corporation, but into something stable and flexible enough to support everyone involved. Our projects ranged from cybersecurity consulting to platform development for startups, and the work remained interesting without dominating every hour of my life. Mornings usually began with the soft sound of waves outside the glass walls and the warm light of sunrise spreading across the water. I would make coffee, open my laptop at the desk facing the ocean, and check messages from developers who were already awake in different time zones. Meetings happened through video calls, often with the background of the beach visible behind me, a view that still felt slightly unreal even after living there for years. Friends visited occasionally, the kind of people who valued quiet conversation more than appearances. We would sit on the sand in the evenings, watching the sky change color while the tide moved slowly in and out. Sometimes I thought about how strange it was that the ocean had once seemed like a symbol of something unreachable, something reserved for people who lived completely different lives. Now it was simply part of background. The lesson that settled into my mind over those years did not arrive in a dramatic moment of realization. It formed gradually, shaped by the contrast between the life I used to chase and the one I eventually built. For a long time, I believed justice meant proving people wrong, confronting them, forcing them to acknowledge their mistakes. But the truth turned out to be much quieter than that. Real freedom arrived the moment I stopped needing those acknowledgments. The peace I had built for myself existed far outside the reach of the people who once treated me like an afterthought. They could argue, criticize, or invent whatever version of events they preferred, but none of it could reach the shoreline where I now lived. Years of silence had taught me something more powerful than revenge ever could. When you build a life so calm, so independent, and so grounded in your own work and values, the people who once mocked you eventually discover that they can no longer reach you at all.